Hi, my name is Sandy Wollman. I'm the managing director and co-founder of the Westchester Angels. And Matt and I just had a really nice chat about some of my experiences as an endurance athlete, a volunteer, and a business owner, both the good and the bad. And it was really a fun chat. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed it.
All right, everybody, welcome to Digging In with Matt Rosenthal. I have an awesome guest today, Sandy Wollman. Really cool story. Before we jump into it, I just want to point out that he's a very successful entrepreneur. He's going to tell you some really cool stories about business. Really interesting stories about some amazing feats he did. And one of them was swimming the English Channel. So not everything was great, right? There's been challenges along the way. And Sandy's going to talk about those too. So you're going to learn some interesting lessons today. He's going to talk about success and failure, and that's it. So listen, Sandy, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Matt, thanks so much for this opportunity to be on your podcast. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
It's awesome to have you here. We had a great conversation earlier. You know, we connect, I think, in certain ways. I appreciate that you appreciate volunteer work and you appreciate helping others, and that's why we do the show. You know, it's about paying it forward. And, you know, we've both been fortunate enough to have success in our life. And what else, if you don't pay it forward, what's the point, right?
Exactly right. You know, success is great to have, but, you know, if you learn from your challenges, then, you know, they're well done.
Awesome. Show over. No, just kidding. So we know who you are now. You know, if we go online and we look at the video of you swimming the English Channel and we look you up, we know that you've done some amazing things. But can you take me back to the beginning, wherever you feel that story starts? Because it couldn't have all been perfect your entire life journey. Take me back to the beginning.
Well, my first job out of school, I worked for 3M, product development engineer in Minnesota. I was a product development engineer for 3M. Researching and developing hook and loop fasteners, Velcro. And it was there I started to get the itch to run. So I started to run just for fun, ran in the winter. I had a beard and it got all frosty when I ran in the winter. It was really kind of cool. So I did a couple of marathons out in Minnesota. I did the St. Paul Marathon. I did Grandma's Marathon, which is along Highway 61, Bob Dylan's famous song, right on near Lake Superior. And then when I moved back to New York, I had an itch. I had an itch that I wanted to do more than just the marathon. So I was exposed to triathlons and Ironman Triathlons through a really good friend in Minnesota. And I got motivated to do some triathlons. So, and of course, me, I just can't do a small distance a triathlon. I got to do an Ironman.
Like go big or go home, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I really don't have a middle. It's either 110% or it's zero. I don't have a middle, and that's good and bad, depending how you look at it. So I self-trained. I read, and this is before the internet. You actually had to read a book. You know, back.
Oh, wow. Wait, there was life before the internet?
Yeah, there was life, and I actually subscribed to Triathlon magazine, and I networked during events. And I was very fortunate. I was able to finish 3 Ironmans in Cape Cod. From the bike was from Hyannisport to P-Town and back. And
were you in your 20s at this point? Like, give me an idea.
I was in my mid to upper 20s. Yes.
Okay. And you're selling the pre-internet. So this is like sometime in the 80s, 90s.
That's correct. 85, 86-ish.
Okay.
And you know, the triathlon space, it's such a collaborative, wholesome space. Everybody's looking to help. You know, so my first triathlon, I'm at the beach and I'm nervous, you know. I mean, it's the unexpected. I train like a lunatic. And I see a father who has a son that's noticeably has physical challenges.
Okay.
And I see the father put the son in a raft, and I don't think about it because I got a 2.4 mile swim in the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm a swimmer, so that came easy to me. Bike riding is just that was my challenge. So I'm going, cool, this dad's going to pull this son in a raft, and that's great, right? So I get out of the water, and I did really well in the swim. That's my background. And I'm on the bike, And the bike has always been a challenge. So I get to the halfway point and I circle back and I'm amazed. I see the father cycling with the son on a contraption in the front wheel. I'm only ahead of him by 15 minutes. I mean, oh my goodness. And then I run into a guy who's biking with one arm. I mean, if you can't get motivated by people like that, I mean, stay home. So then I actually, on the turnaround, I see the father pushing the son in like a little buggy. I'm blown away. So crossing the finish line of your first Ironman, that's something that you take to your last breath. It's just a monumental thing, especially for a guy like me that didn't really have biking experience. Half hour, 40 minutes later, Dick and Rick Hoyt finish the finish line. And I have to tell you, I mean, I get a little verklempt when I talk about it, but here's a son that had noticeable challenges, and they started to bond because they did endurance events together. You know, they did, 23 Boston marathons. They ran across the country together. And unfortunately, Dick Hoyt passed away a year or two ago at age 80. But if that doesn't motivate you and make you feel that you're part of something, it was really, really a fantastic experience. So a couple of years went by and I wanted to do a different challenge. The third Ironman, I crossed the finish line. And as soon as I crossed that finish line, I was done. 3 years of training like a lunatic. And I worked and I trained and I ate and slept. That's what I did. So I signed up to swim around Manhattan. I mean, it's a leisurely 28-mile swim. Why not?
No big deal.
No big deal. And I don't mean to be flip about it, but after 8.5 hours, I finished and I had a little bit left in the tank. And we had a boat follow us around, and the instructions were watch out for planes flying in the East River and landing, because back then you could. It was a really fun event. I had a kayaker with me. You could see the skyline, right? I mean, you know where you are at all times. And sometimes you're swimming backwards, the current's against you if you stop. So I got out and I had a little bit left, and I'd always thought about maybe swimming the English Channel. So I rested it. I put my entire life into my career in the garment center, Carter Mills. And in my upper 20s, I started going to India to source fabrics. And we did a lot of business with Ralph Lauren Home. And this is going to India in the late 80s. This is before suitcases had wheels, right? So I'm going to India. And so one time, they didn't have direct flights. You'd have to stop in London and change. And I go, you know what? I'm going to contact an English Channel pilot. And I want to go talk to him about possibly doing the English Channel. So I stopped in Heathrow. I took a train to a bus to a train. He picked me up at the station, took me to his house, and Mike Oram, really nice, tried to talk me out of doing it.
Why?
I mean, he tried to talk me out of doing it. And I get back, and he was very lovely, really answered all my questions, and he tried to talk me out of it. Then on the way back to the airport, now I got it. He doesn't want to take people that are not serious. He wants to set the record for most successful pilots. So if you're not motivated and enthused, he doesn't want to bother with you. That's why he tried to talk me out of it. So I did whatever, I used that as motivation. So I trained for 9 months. I did double workouts. I was swimming in open water in April. It was 47 degrees because it's a cold water swim. It's about cold water. I revved up my mileage to 40, 50, 60 miles a month, 65 miles. I tapered, but it's about cold water. So for 3 months, I did not take a warm shower. I mean, you want to talk about going to work in the morning and taking a cold shower. After my swim, I'd do double workouts. I'm taking cold showers because cold water had to be my friend. It's a head game.
So you obviously adapted. I mean, that worked.
It did work. I had to gain weight. And part of my diet was eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs Swiss almond chocolate, Swiss almond vanilla.
There's motivation.
Like you're swimming 10, 20 miles a week, whatever it is. You got to put weight on because you can't use a wetsuit. You're not allowed to have an advantage over Matthew Webb, who did it in 1875. And that's why there's the English Channel Swimming Association and now the English Channel Pilot Federation to oversee. This is a very traditional thing. No wetsuit, a bathing cap, goggles, proper swimming trunks, no insulation allowed. And it's very simple. You start in England and you don't quit till you get to France. That's it. It's really kind of simple. But the real challenge, and there's a lot of real challenges, and in my opinion, if you're doing something monumental like this, and I don't care if you're trying to swim the English Channel or you're doing your first 10K, or you want to leave your cushy job and start a startup, any kind of thing starts with two basic principles. And in my simple mind, it starts with respect and motivation. With respect, you have to understand how difficult your goal will be, how much time you need to train or whatever your endeavor is, how hard it's going to be, what's your current abilities, and how much it's going to affect your family. And motivation is a topic is a word that's thrown around a lot. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, in his bodylifting book that he printed 1,000 years ago, had the best definition.
Pumping Iron.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah,
pumping. I've read that book about 100 times. Phenomenal.
Yeah, the one with the silver cover, is really thick. And I'm going to paraphrase from Arnold. Motivation is the driving force that allows you to develop the determination to train for hours a day. It makes the difference between just going through the motions and really pushing yourself. Motivation creates discipline, and discipline comes from the joy of looking forward to accomplishing the goal that you have so clearly pictured in your mind. And this allows you to enjoy your training every day. So, I don't want to take up, because the English Channel could take up hours, but the challenge is, it's cold water swim. It's really July through August. Otherwise, it's too cold. You want to swim on neap tides, which has about 10 or 15 feet less water in the channel than spring tides. And back then, there was only 4 captains that were authorized to take you. You have an official observer writing notes. You get to Dover, you eat in the 2 restaurants, you see the movie, and there's nothing to do. You go, right. I mean, we're watching Little House on the Prairie discussing what Marissa Gilbert's going to do or whatever, And the thing is, you never know when you're going to get a call to go. You've got to be ready to go in a couple hours. So I was fortunate. A lot of swimmers stay there for 2 weeks and never get a chance to swim because each pilot has a repertoire, a list of swimmers for each tide. I was lucky. He put me up to the number 1 slot for the tide. So I got the best of dibs. And I was blessed with a beautiful day, relatively flat water, and a lot of ups and downs. But I will just mention that the 10th hour was by far and away the worst hour of my life, because even though it took me 13 hours and 6 minutes, successive swimming in the English Channel can come down to minutes. If you feed for an extra 30 seconds every half hour after 10 hours, that's a significant time. And if you miss the tide change, it would have increased my swim by another 5 or 6 hours. So I made the tide by less than 5 minutes, the tide change. And
as you're talking about this, I don't think the average person would even stop to think about, it's like, watching a race car. I mean, every little thing matters. Every little thing impacts the time. And it's all these things that the average person like me has no idea about. And listening to you talk about tides and listening to you talk about all the little things that impact the time.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. Now, did you discover that there were things that could impact the time that through your own training, you're like, oh, wait, nobody told me this, but I can get a little edge if I do this?
Well, if you want to feel really insignificant in life, be 100 yards away from a 600-foot oar boat going at 15 knots, right? Yeah. So, It's the busiest shipping channel in the world. It's a historic site. It's a cemetery. It's a graveyard for sailors and pilots during the world wars. It's really a volatile body of water. It could be flat, and then half hour later, you can have really bad swells and tides and currents. Not to mention the jellyfish.
I saw that on the video. I saw a video
I got
of you.
hit by a couple of jellyfish.
Yeah.
People have swallowed jellyfish and had to be hauled out by helicopter. So
this is dangerous.
What?
This is really dangerous.
Yeah, a lot of people have lost their lives. You could be swimming at night. I mean, that's a real mind game, swimming at night in a cold body of water. I trained to be able to swim for 6 hours in cold water. And I had to be certified by my crew, by a person on my crew, and sent to the English Channel. I had to have a whole physical. But my goal, and here's the subtle thing, when we finally got to England and to Dover with my good friend and my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law learned a valuable lesson not to drink rum and cokes on a slow-moving boat in English Channel. He had a really bad, his day was worse than mine. He was green. He hasn't been on a boat since. But you get to the shore after 12, 15 hours of travel. I did not touch the water. I did not touch it because I didn't want it to feel cold after a day of travel. And there's a lot of swimmers there. People, it's such a friendly thing. People are always helping. I didn't get into the water the next day. And I had to put 15 pounds on. I was like a porpoise, a seal. And so the morning we left, there were 4 swimmers, unbeknownst to each of us. Right next to us happened to be another swimmer. And that's just by where the boats happened to be docked that day. He had TV crews on. He was a professional triathlete. He had sponsors up and down his shirt. The guy couldn't be nicer. Really a nice guy. I told my crew they're going to pull him out in 4 or 5 hours. Go, why? Go. He's a triathlete. He's got no body fat. This is a cold water swim. He didn't train for this event. He just thought it's a long swim. Well, sure enough, he's a million miles ahead of me. And then 5, 6 hours later, we see the boat coming back. Didn't make it.
That's really interesting. I want you to go back for a second. So when you were, I don't want to interrupt you because you said that Schwarzenegger quote so eloquently, but talking about motivation.
Right.
If you said this, I apologize, but what was your motivation?
My motivation was to swim the English Channel.
Why though?
Because that's the ultimate in swimming. That's the ultimate. I mean, you could do things that are even crazier that the less than 1/10 of 100th of a percent do. But I got the bug, Matt. I got the bug. And I trained like a lunatic. I mean, I'm up on Sunday morning at the Y looking at fur balls on the bottom of the YMCA.
I've been to the Ys, and they all have those fur balls rolling around like tumbleweed.
And I respect the old ladies that are swimming. God bless them, but don't swim in the fast lane. I mean, I'm up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. I mean, who does that? But you know what? As I said, the motivation creates discipline, or as Arnold Schwarzenegger said, I look forward to every workout. I was in the zone, man. I couldn't stop working out. I mean, I was addicted almost. I mean, maybe that's the proper word, because I had a singular goal in mind. And I knew that the potential for success is minimized. At the time I did it, only 30 to 40% of swimmers made it. And I knew that there's a potential for failure. I never thought about it. I was thinking, I know I could swim for 6 hours, and I trained to swim for 6 hours. And then after that, it's the day that's going to take me. They were either going to pull my rear end out because I got cold or I couldn't do it, or I was going to go to France. There was no in between. No in between.
I think I'm hearing like, I'm sorry to press on this too much, but I'm hearing like your motivation was actually it was to, you're competing with yourself. Your motivation, swimming the English Channel was what you did. It's not why you did it. The why, I'm curious if you were even like that as a kid. Like, did you challenge yourself to like, I'm going to do this just to see if I could do it, because I want to prove to myself that I'm capable, that I'm good enough, that I can do it.
Yeah. I think it had, when I swam around Manhattan, I had a little bit left. I wasn't totally wiped out and exhausted like I was after the Ironmans. And, I was a distance junkie at that point.
Yeah.
1 day distance junkies, not multiple days, things like that. A 1 day junkie. And, the difference, and I've spoken to Olympic medalists and swimmers, if you're a professional if you're a high ranked swimmer, the difference between first and sixth is that much, right? You could lose a medal by 1/100th of a second.
Sure.
Right? So those swimmers, the pools are all the same at this point. You're competing against another human being, and you know what the outcome is. You know that you're going to do the 142.3 or whatever it is, and the world record is this. When you're swimming against the channel, you're swimming against yourself and Mother Nature. It's two very different disciplines for the same sport. They are actually very different sports in that respect. The stroke is different, right. And the motivation and the goals are different. Matt.
So you're a confident guy to begin with, right? So now you do this, and like you knew before you could do anything, but like, how did it feel after that?
Well, this is where I get a little verklempt, because it was a head.
Get verklempt, that's okay.
It was a very difficult day. It was a mind game. After 6 hours, it was all about how bad do you want it? How much pain and suffering do you want to self-impose? The boat is 5 feet away. You could end your pain and suffering anytime. The 10th hour, I had to swim as fast as I possibly could without feeding, because I was going to miss the tide. And my boat captain told me this, and he said, you have to swim as fast as you can, faster than you swam the entire day for the next hour. And if you don't, I'm going to hit you on the head with this stick. And he hits me on the head with a stick, right? And I'm swimming, and he's sitting right on the side of the boat, eating a roasted chicken, throwing the bones at me.
That's not right.
But what he did was he was taking my mind off the agony. He was focusing my attention to hating him, to not liking him. And he hit me in this. He'd hit me in the head. He had a big stick. He saw me slowing down. He'd hit me. Mind games, all mind games, because I was a torturous 7 hours after the 6 hours. So why for the last 500 yards was I able to swim as fast as I could? Mind games.
It was like mental fortitude.
It's all about how bad you want it. And if you're going to be a distance athlete, if you're going to do a triathlon or whatever it is, there's going to be ups and downs. That's why I did a lot of quality work, not slow distance. I did a lot of speed work, because that helped me get through the tough times. I mean, my emotions went up and down like a EKG chart. I mean, and I had a really good captain who understood the mental challenges, because after a while it wasn't physical. So to answer your point, I was the 470th individual to swim the channel, and I didn't talk about it for 10 years. Literally, I couldn't talk about it because I got too emotionally messed up. I'd start to get very verklempt. I'd start because the emotions of the day came back. But after time dwelled, and I never talk about it. I only did it for one reason, to prove to myself that I could do it. It's not something that I brag about. If I have lunch with somebody and they told me they did their first 10K, I would never mention anything I did. I don't want to take away from their success.
That's right. Wow, that's really generous.
Everything I did was for me, for my head, and to prove that I could do it.
That's the message. That's the message. Like, and I'm so glad
that is the message.
You're bringing that.
It's about personal challenge.
Yes. Now, can you in that time period, I'm not hearing you talk a lot about work. So you were working at the time, right?
I was a workaholic. During that time, I was in the garment center. We were large fabric suppliers. The notorious industry has earned its reputation properly. It's 11 o'clock at night and I'm trying to call India, right? And the lines were bad back in the 80s, the phone lines. And I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Harrison. And I'm going, and this is back when I was a triathlete, I'm going, Morley, can you hear me? Morley, can you hear me? And sometimes I could hear me, you have to call me back. And I go, Morley, can you hear me? I get up in the morning, my neighbor goes, did you get a hold of Morley?
That's very funny.
No, but I worked and I trained because at that point, when I did the channel, when I did the Ironmans, I was single, no problem. When I did the swim around Manhattan, I was married. When I did the channel, our daughter was 3 years old and our son was born right in the middle of training 3 months before the channel. And I was only able to swim the channel because I had a supportive wife. Without Lisa's attention to everything else and allowing me to work and train, the English Channel would have remained a dream. That's why it's important to respect how these challenges are going to affect your family.
You mentioned, I'm going to come back to that in a sec because you mentioned it before and it didn't go unnoticed, but I do want to talk about how it affected your family. So you were working, you were running a business.
Yeah, I'm working. I'm doing the Grand
while
Central
this is going on
twice a day. Yeah, it was either working or working out. There was no other time. I mean, I rested one day. I always rested one day a week, wherever that happened to fall out. I was in a master swim program. I doubled in a couple of workouts with the middies. This is a funny story. I'm swimming with 13, 14, and 15-year-old kids, and they're gliding. And I'm at the wall, and I'm turning around because I couldn't do a flip turn on butterflies or whatever. And these kids are giving me a dirty look. What are you doing? You're too slow. Get out of my It's really very humbling.
Sure,
But
sure.
I would do double workouts, and for me it wasn't thinking. It was like I had to do it, and I looked forward to. I can't tell you, it's kind of crazy. I looked forward to workouts, and some of these workouts were really grueling. I mean, I'm swimming in the cold water. I happen to live about a mile away as the crow flies from the Long Island Sound. It's a privilege. But I went in the water as the end of April, and you see a family on the beach, right? And they're feeding the seagulls or whatever. And it's, you can't, it's not bathing suit weather. So they're just hanging out. They see my friend and I, because I never ever swim alone in open water, ever. It's like I'm a diver. You never dive alone. Somebody always has their eyes on me. You don't know what can happen. The family sees me taking my clothes off into a bathing suit, and I'm going in the water. They take their kids by the hand and they move to the other side of the beach.
What's wrong with this guy?
Like the guys, we got to stay away from this guy. He's nuts. And rightfully so. I do the same thing, but
yeah,
it was just a matter of baby steps. And I knew that it's about cold water. It's really a cold water swim. That's it.
You've got a few patents, right?
Yeah.
You're passionate about the swim. Like I love your emotions. Like it's awesome watching you talk about what this accomplishment really is.
Thank you for the kind words.
Man. I feel like you put so much effort into building a business, though.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like I want to hear about that. You've got other accomplishments. Like you've done a lot. So how do let's say we're talking to somebody
I'm very, very fortunate, because luck happens to play a big part in everybody's life. And I believe that if you have the proper respect and the right karma, luck favors you as compared to somebody that doesn't. So my first job out of school, I was a product development. I have an engineering degree in textile manufacturing. Knowing I was going to go into my dad's business, I started delivering sample orders in 8th grade. And I started.
So your dad was in the garment business.
That's correct. We were fabric suppliers to garment. Our customers were apparel manufacturers, and back then there was a vibrant, textile industry in the South, which is gone. So one summer, I wanted to always get out and sell. I want to sell goods. So one day in the summer, and I'm working all summers and through college, I went to Philadelphia College of Textiles and Science, which is now Philadelphia University. But back then, I was one of a handful of engineers that were taking a class. And I think it was my junior to senior year, my dad said, "Okay, kid, wear your suit tomorrow." I had one suit, right? I had long hair, longer than this. And the next day he gives me a suitcase, a briefcase. He puts a bunch of color cards in and a price list, and he opens the door. He says, "I'll see you at 5:00. I go, "Dad, what are you doing?" I go, "You can't do that." I go, "Aren't you going to introduce me to customers?" And he goes, "If I introduce you to customers I have, what are you doing? I want you to find new customers." And I just want to also let you know that my dad was an unbelievable guy. He started his business. He had retinitis pigmentosa. My dad was blind, and he ran his business.
He was fully blind?
Totally blind. And he used to joke that if we had a customer gave us this shade of purple to match, and they were going to do sheetings with purple, and the color was off, they get on the phone. And my dad said, "Well, I approved the color myself. It's got to be right." He was really well respected for the challenges he had. He was one of the last great yellers on the planet, but he'd give you the shirt off his back. So he says, "Kid," he says, "now you're a salesman. You can't stay in the office. I suggest you go to the diner across the street on 39th Street at 6th Avenue or whatever. Learn the price list, learn the fabrics." And you know what he said? The Empire State Building at that point was mostly textile companies with lawyers and accountants. He said, "Why don't you start at the top of the Empire State Building and work your way down?" That's how I learned to sell, canvassing the Empire State Building.
How'd you do?
Very humbly, I got some orders. I actually worked my way down to the 8th floor. And if you know the Empire State Building, as you go down, the offices get bigger.
Right.
Oxford Manufacturing was one of the largest apparel manufacturers for shirts in the country at that point. And I'd say, go to the receptionist, and I'd have my suit on. I'd smile, I have my suitcase. "May I see a piece goods buyer, please?" "Who's calling?" Sandy Wollman. Now, back then, they didn't have Vistaprint, so I had my dad's business cards, and I crossed out Ed, and I put Sandy down. Right? Talk about humble beginnings, right?
Right.
And this gentleman comes out, he goes, "Where's Ed? Where's Ed?" And he looks at me and goes, "Who are you?" And I go, "I'm Ed's son, Sandy." "Okay, kid, come on in." So my dad had developed a finish because he was a really great technical person, in addition to being a business person. He developed a finish where you could take 100% cotton fabric and make it wrinkle free. And it was a challenge because when you put those kinds of finishes on, it messes up the tensile strength of the fabric. So it's a trade-off, but he mastered that. I wound up taking a 250,000 yard order that was delivered over a 3-month period. I'm getting commission checks in college for like $120 every other week. I won't get into details, but I had a lot of fun my senior year in college. That's all I can tell you. But
hang on a sec. Was that something that at that time nobody else had that technology? Was he the only one doing that?
He pioneered it. A lot of people copied it. But we were all alone on that for years. Like the white fabric that Guess & Company used to use for their white shirts back in the day. I met George Marciano on a trip. Really a lovely guy. He loved our high count broadcloth because we ultra shrunk it without a finish on it. So it allowed Guess & Company to garment wash the stuff, garment dye it, and crap it up with wrinkles and stuff, which is what they did, without excess shrinkage. So that saves an apparel company a lot of money. So they buy hundreds of thousands of yards at a time.
Wow, that's interesting. So, okay. So, you know, I'm like listening to the story about what you've achieved with in sport, so to speak, but I knew there had to be something going on where you grew up in an environment that there was, I mean, you were doing cutting edge stuff. You knew what it was like to be around somebody who's doing uncommon things.
Yeah, you know
right?
what? He was just dad, right? My brother and I just looked at our father. He's dad,
Right.
you know, and we grew up knowing.
But he was uncommon. He was special.
Uncommon. My friends in high school didn't know he was blind. They thought he had an imperfection of sight because he got along so well. He knew the house. We lived in an apartment in Larchmont, and he knew every square inch of it, you know, and you know, he was quite a guy, quite a guy.
Now, thank you for giving me a framework, like kind of how it really started, right? So you had a very interesting childhood. So really cool. And this is in New York. You're living in New York.
Yeah, we were in
Right.
Mount Vernon at the time. We grew up very humbly until my dad started going to his own business, and we went from lower middle to upper middle class.
So you experienced, that's fantastic. So you experienced, and maybe that explains why you're so humble, because you're a humble guy, at least from me getting to know you. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you started out in a way where you saw different levels of success, and you know what it feels like at each level.
Yeah.
Would I be close with that?
You know, yeah. And, you know, I had humble, you know, out of college, I got the best job in the world. I got one of the best jobs out of our graduating class, working for 3M in Minnesota. Art Fry, the guy that developed Post-it pads, worked 4 halls down from me.
No kidding.
Yeah. And my boss interviewed me at college. We hit it off. He came, I went to Minnesota. He hired me there. I got a letter of it. I made $21,500 in 1980, and I was thrilled. So I'd spent 3 days at the manufacturing plant. I could take Velcro is made on very small, what they call needle loops. I got to the point where I could take that apart and put it together blindfolded. So I had an idea that actually came to fruition in the elevator of the Warwick Hotel in New York. You want to hear something really boring? I went to a polypropylene symposium.
that sounds like really exciting.
It's like watching paint dry on a hot, humid day.
Exactly right.
But in the elevator, now polypropylene was used in another product because when you heat polypropylene, it happens to form a mushroom head. And that was used in a product called Dual Lock, which is used sporadically in industrial uses. So I saw somebody in the elevator that said 3M. And I got to talking to him. And 3M is a huge, like, collegiate complex, all pilot plant. It's like they had their own taxi service to go from one building to the other. And if there's something you need to know about, any technology, it's just a matter of finding somebody in a complex. So I got to talking to the gentleman who was in a whole other division at 3M, and they extrude fiber. They made their own synthetic fiber. And I go, I never knew that. Obviously you make polypropylene. I go, can you do different shapes other than circular? Can you do like triangles or trilobals? And he goes, yeah, we have a spinneret. So how it's made is you have the plastic pellets, they heat it up and they force it through a stainless steel die with different shapes. And they went to his lab and they could make trilobal fibers. Now, when you weave that and it's formed as a loop and you put it under heat, it shrinks and it forms like a treble hook. So when the loops get under that, it's permanent. You can't take it out. So that was the patent I created for 3M. They got the rights, I got the plaque. And you know what? I wanted the plaque because I couldn't do it without 3M. And as I'm told, that product went into the automotive industry. I actually went to a Chrysler plant in Detroit. Oh my God, that's a whole other story. But back then, the seats were made offline. and they had to attach the upholstery to the foam with hooks. It was very manually intensive. So the invention I had is that treble hook was foamed into the seats, and the back of the upholstery fabric had little scrim loops on it. And once you shrunk that down, you can't take it off. It's permanent. And that was my invention. And I'll just tell you, back then, my whole wardrobe fit on 3 hooks. I had long hair. Nobody cared. The gentleman that I replaced, who retired at age 70 something, was a gentleman named Mel Caliburn. You know, Matt, me and you, we go through life, we meet a handful of people that are just ultra beautiful people. Mel Caliburn was a retired baker who was really good with his hands. He retired with 37 patents, an integral part in the development of double stick Scotch tape. And if it wasn't for his gold foil tape, we would have not landed on the moon.
Can you connect that right there?
Landed on the gold foil tape was used as a heat resistance when the module landed on the moon to get through the atmosphere. And his gold foil tape allowed the lunar landing module to land on the moon. And I'm replacing this guy. Talk about being humble.
Yeah, there's no pressure there.
No pressure, but the nicest guy.
That's very humbling. It really is.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So when you recreate something that ends up getting patented, but I mean, there's no compensation for it. Like, it belongs to them because you worked for them.
Right. The moment you walk in the door, you sign documents saying anything you create, either on your own time or through the company owns the rights. And that's exactly the right way to do it, Matt, because without 3M's facilities, there's no patent. And you're a product development engineer, and that's what your job is to create things. So, did Art Fry get compensated over and above for Post-its? Of course he did. But you know what? I got the plaque. I just wanted the plaque, and I went actually to the U.S. Patent Office because they rejected our claim. So I'm going to the U.S. Patent Office with 2 patent attorneys from 3M in Washington. You get in the door and you see a desk from the 1940s, 15 manila folders up 15 feet high, and a little head sticking out between the whole thing. It was really an unbelievable experience, but the patent inspector, we stated these are the reasons why we think this is, and he goes, you have a good point. And he authorized the patent 2 weeks later.
I'm listening to you tell these stories. These stories they're interesting. They're amazing.
Thank you.
I feel like you probably have like endless amounts of these stories, but there must have been things along the way. Like, it sounds like all success, all highs, all like triumphs. But was there ever a point where you're like, oh my God, like I can't do this, or I'm not gonna be able to even swim the English Channel, or I'm not gonna be able to run this business? Like, give me something where you had a tough time, because I want that message out there. Like, how do you get through tough times?
I spent 25 years in the garment center, knowing that I was going to take over my dad's business when he retired or passed. I knew that from 8th grade, So I went to college for textiles, and my dad wouldn't hire me right away out of college. Get a job, get your own experience, and then come back, and which I did. I was an integral part in helping that business grow. I developed a computer system. We're dealing with India. We're communicating with a telex machine. That's like Morse code, right? I mean, when the fax machine came in, it was revolutionary, and then we started to computerize the business. I'd work at night with a developer. I created our own computer system. And then there were people that were making software for textile converters. We got a big IBM box, and we did the business really well. We had 45 people on 6th Avenue. I did the hiring and the firing, and I was a workaholic. I'd work 24 hours a day because in India, I'm talking India 11:30 at night because they're backwards. And I'm in the country of India sourcing fabric. We did big business with Ralph Lauren. We started needling for them. We did like 1,000,000 yards of one pattern. I mean, they were just a really terrific, very, very strict on color matching, and rightfully so. We did the business really well. What the company didn't do really well was legal and accounting. And my dad had 3 partners, and one partner didn't really do much, respectfully speaking, and another partner did some really bad things with the books. So we did, and I knew the business, but I was never taught the overall thing of, financial statements, and they kept inflating the price of the inventory. We were factored, which means we would sell our receivables to a factoring company. They would check the credit of ABC manufacturer. They would front us the money. We billed on 60-day terms, and we got used to that money for a percentage. Fine. Well, as it turns out, my dad passed after my mom passed 6 months before, and my dad died of a broken heart 6 months later. Now, I'm fulfilling my position of taking my dad's place that I dreamed about in 8th grade. 2 weeks later, we fired our accountant, got another accountant, and he showed us the real books and said, Sandy, this company can't survive. You're going to go out of business.
How close were you to that?
How close was I to?
How close was the company to going out of business?
Well,
time-wise,
we had to play a really vicious game. We couldn't let the trade know we were going to go out of business. Otherwise, our inventory, which is ultimately what put us out of business, would be worth 10 cents on the dollar. We had to do it gradually. So I had to fire people slowly. I had to fire people that didn't deserve to be fired, that worked for my dad for 30 years. You want to talk about tough times. And I lost 2 years of my life after the business failed. And I remember that one of the bankers called me in, and he says, Sandy, I'm sorry that your dad passed. He was a lovely man. You have to sign a personal guarantee in order to fulfill your dad's wishes. And I go to Sal, and the guy was a nice guy. Always wore corduroy pants for whatever reason. I don't know. I go, Sal, I'm not signing a freaking personal guarantee. Are you out of your mind? He goes, Sandy, he says, I'm pulling credits from you guys. If you don't, in order to succeed your dad in business, this is part of the deal. Of course, I was never informed of that before, and it took me a while. And he said, you want to think about it, show the document to your attorney, by all means, find out what your responsibilities. He was a good guy doing his job. When my dad passed, and I knew the company was going out of business, he called in his personal guarantee, my personal guarantee, a month later. He said, Sandy, you know what? You're going to get screwed. But I know you got the money. And listen, I wasn't crying poverty, but I didn't have a lot of money back then. So out of my dad's hardworking inheritance from my mom and dad, a third of it went to the bank to pay my personal guarantee. And I had to let people go and downsize really slow, carefully and slowly. And I lost 2 years of my life, Matt. I was depressed. I remember the last day I was there, one of the other partner's sons had an adjacent business, and he did the final couple of months. I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So I got my overalls on, and in my basement, there's a bad part of the basement that hadn't been touched in 40 years. I cleaned the basement. I put 5 coats of paint on the floor because I didn't know what I was going to do. I was depressed. I needed help from professionals. I got into some really bad habits. And I'm alive today because of 3 people. My accountant, who became a really good friend and consultant and advisor, my attorney at the time, and most of all, my wife. If it wasn't for those 3 people, I guarantee you I would not be here talking to you today. because I got into some bad troubles. Not legal problems, but it was a very dark time of my life. But after 2 years of darkness and professional help, I recreated myself. I went back to school at age 50 to sit for the certified financial planner exam. What a horrible experience. I'm learning the tax code in the summertime. My God. And I took the CFP exam. I failed that sucker. It was terrible. It was a 12-hour exam, and CFAs, which is the highest financial certification you could have, they left the exam going, what was that about? So I understand road rage, Matt, because it was a 4-hour test on Friday. It was down Pace University in Manhattan, 3 and 4 hours on a Saturday. And you're just drained. It's just, there's 2 right answers. One's more right than the other. I get into 2 hours of traffic on the West Side Drive going home. I was ready to shoot people. And 6 weeks later, I knew I failed the exam because the envelope I got was really thin.
Right.
But I became a financial planner anyway. I was very active in the Financial Planning Association. And then I realized that the model is terrible. I'm charging $3,000. I didn't take assets under management for total financial review. I'm sitting with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. Smith is 65 years old. He's 100 pounds overweight. He smokes cigarettes, and he got $5 million of assets. He doesn't have a will. And I go to Mr. Smith. I go, you worked really hard to pass your assets down to your 2 kids. I did. I go, you want somebody in a black smock to allocate the money, or do you want to do it yourself? I don't want to write a will. I'm superstitious. As soon as I write a will, I'm going to die. I'm not doing it. Okay, fine.
You're going to die even if you don't write it. You better write it.
9 months later, he signs the will, and I'm charging him $3,000 flat fee. Well, so I did that for a couple of years. My financial planners became aligned through investments in some stocks that really did well. And I opened up a nonprofit here in Westchester, a 501c3, and I self-funded it because I don't like asking people for money. And we have small business owners not make some of the same stupid mistakes I've made in business. And, is
this the Westchester Angels you're talking about?
No, this was something that led right to the Westchester Angels. Beforehand, it's the Small Business Advisory Alliance. I had 17 volunteers, insurance and branding and computers. And we helped like 70, 80 companies. I work with the United Way, Community Capital, and SBA lender. You mean I have to open up an LLC? What's an LLC? That kind of stuff. And we started running into companies that had scalable business models. And we did some research, and I closed the 501c3. And my main volunteer, Jeff Lair, who was an international business consultant, very successful. Me and him started the Westchester Angels literally over a couple of beers on a Sunday. He said, okay, let's try. We didn't know what we were doing. We learned as we go, and we treated ourselves like a startup. And that's how the Westchester Angels started, Matt.
I got to interrupt you for a second, because before we started actually the official interview, you mentioned something to me about my volunteer work. And
yes,
it's
yes.
What you didn't mention, which I knew we were going to talk about, was your own volunteer work.
Yeah.
And what you said to me, I don't recall exactly how you said it, but the idea that every one of those businesses that you volunteered, that you touched, there's an outcome. There's like this effect that it continues to mushroom. You don't even know who you really impacted, but you worked with a lot of people, and you did it out of the goodness of your own heart.
Yeah. And you know what? Anytime you go up the elevator, you always have to remember the people that are still on the first floor. You have to do that. That's the right karma. I'm leading a privileged life because I have a good wife. I have a good support team. I've been very fortunate in my life. And I always give back. My brother and I put kids through camp last summer. During the pandemic, I funded an initiative that paid the rent for 30 business owners during the pandemic. So to help landlords and business owners. And I don't really talk about that stuff. I mean, you brought it up. I don't put it on my LinkedIn profile because, that kind of karma doesn't have to, that kind of good stuff comes from here. And
That's
it's
right.
about self-appreciation, knowing that you're trying to help people. Like you as a volunteer firefighter, as we spoke about, I mean, the lives that you've saved, the impact that you've had on your families, you'll never know the so on and so on after that. You pull the kid out, and then now he's got a master's degree in whatever, and he's doing something different. And that's the beauty. And every so often, it doesn't happen. And, every so often you get the full circle. You run into somebody you help, and they go, Sandy, I can't thank you enough because you helped me get by that month, or you gave me the advice that allowed me to open up a second location. The first location is easy. The second location takes a lot of guts.
It's about
impact.
impact.
You got to pay it back. You got to pay it back.
You have to. You're impacting other people's lives. So, I actually don't talk about it much at all. But I can relate to what you're saying. I sat on the board of directors for many years of the Y in New Jersey, where I used to live, and one of the things I used to do, it was the same thing you mentioned. I used to actually contribute a certain dollar amount every year, specifically earmarked to put kids through camp, who would come out of the inner city and be able to go to camps in northwestern Jersey, up in the sticks. They would never get that experience. I never talk about it. In fact, this might be the first time I've ever talked about it out loud, right. Especially on something that's being recorded, because we don't do it for that reason. We do it because you expect nothing in return. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do, because you can.
My brother initiated this initiative up in Rockland County, and we want to interview these are what, fourth and fifth graders, third graders. Mm-hmm. How would you like to go to camp? What's camp? Is it kind of like school? Do I have to do homework?
No, you have fun.
Yeah. And then they go, well, the recess that you have during school, yeah, it's recess all day.
Yeah, the whole summer.
I go, really?
Yeah.
Some of these kids, they have no idea what camp. I mean, it's heartbreaking, But we sent 30 some odd kids together to camp, and we actually visited the camp. What fun. Outside pools, they're learning how to swim. They're learning to interact with kids in a fun way. The volunteers there running it, there's a handful of grown-ups, and there's college kids that are counselors. I mean, if that doesn't make you feel good, stay home.
Did you go to camp when you were a kid?
Yeah, I went to a camp that's now an apartment complex in Yonkers. So I went to Robin Hill Day Camp long time ago.
There's a lot of people. I didn't realize. So I went to camp as a kid for 8 years. I went to a Jewish day camp, and my grandmother paid for it because I grew up very poor, so we had no money. So my grandmother paid for that. Was the one thing she wanted me to go to camp. And what I didn't know until I got much older was then not everybody goes to camp. Most people don't even know what camp is. And so now when we talk about what you and I are talking about, being able to expose kids to diversity, not just in terms of people, but experiences in different types of programs, sports, arts and crafts, music, it's invaluable. Like I carry that with me for my entire life. And to be able to give that to other kids who would never have that is priceless.
It's a privilege.
If you get a chance, anybody that ever watches this, whether they watch it tomorrow or they watch this 5 years from now, that is something you should do if you can. You should really try and put kids through camp. It's a great cause.
The satisfaction, you sleep really well at night knowing you've helped another kids, another human being out, and with in my old age, I don't watch the news anymore. I'm going to be ignorant and happy.
Yeah.
But there's so many good people out there doing so many good things. You just don't hear about them. I mean, there's 1,000 times more good people doing good things to help other human beings out than the not good people that you hear about. The challenge is you just got to open your ears and find them because they're there.
They're all over the place. And the news, that's not interesting. Right? If they can't do what they do with that, the news is all negative and people want to hear. It's just people want to stop and watch a train wreck or watch a fire. So there's nothing interesting about talking about all the good that people do. But you're right, it is everywhere, and all you have to do is just participate in your community and get just a little bit, and you'll get to know a lot of good people doing a lot of volunteer work for a lot of good causes.
And that's why at the Westchester Angels, our community is Westchester. We give back to help. There's an Element 46, which is an incubator. And we volunteer to help startups in the incubator. I teach a couple of classes on how to make a really bad pitch so you can make a good pitch. But I spend most of my time helping startups, whether we invest or not. We want to help startups succeed. So we help with pitch decks and mentorship, and it's the angel space is very much like the triathlon space. It's not competitive, it's collaborative. All the big angel groups in Manhattan, the Golden Seeds, the Angels, the 37 Angels, the Harvard alumni, we're all friends. We all share. I mean, it's a collaborative space. I lead an initiative that at 5 o'clock, we have monthly deal flow calls where all the angel group leaders, they get together and we discuss startups that we're interested in. It's such a rewarding and fun space. Jeff and myself, we started the Westchester Angels 5 years ago. We're not compensated. All of our small membership fees stay in the bank for pay some of our expenses, but it's there for the benefit of our group. And we actually now have a portfolio, but we started very humbly, Matt. We started in my friend's business who had an after-school activities for middle school kids, 3D printing, programming. The first year and a half of our meetings was in red, green, and yellow chairs with pictures of Super Mario on the wall. we started very humbly. And the first couple of meetings, Jeff and I, we put so much energy into it, we just needed a drink. So we walked around, searched for the nearest bar. People started following us, and now it became a thing. So fast forward to today, we've got 35 members. We're still not compensated. That's not the right karma for what we do. We're a traditional angel group where we do due diligence in groups. Each startup, each investor makes their own decision. Our sweet spot is startups just coming up the right side of the hockey stick where there's some revenue. We don't consider biotech a medical device simply because that's a different field. We don't have that expertise. And we've made, 30 different investments. We actually had an exit opportunity. Early on, I led due diligence for a company called Acrolis that has a back office and AI that scans documents, right? What a boring idea, scanning documents, right? But they've conquered the small business lending space because all those documents get uploaded. That was done in a manila folder manually. Now it saves small business lenders 35 to 40 minutes per application. So we invested at a slower valuation. We had an opportunity to exit at an 18 times valuation.
Wow.
So I actually led due diligence with 5 different angel groups, but nobody wanted to write the check out first. They sent it to me. I went into Acrolis's office with $775,000 worth of checks. Didn't have my name on it, but that's okay. But there's a picture of us having a champagne toast, and now Sam Bobley, he's just rocking it. So that's the pearl in our oyster. And what we're doing differently, Matt, if I may, is most angel groups have their investor meetings at shared workspaces like we did. And we always followed up with a schmooze down at the bar, which is always the most fun. It allows members to talk to each other, get to know each other, and allows investors to talk to startups over a beer and relaxed atmosphere. But right now, I actually had a moment of clarity 6 months ago. Moments of clarity are few and far between. I said, why not have investor meetings at cool locations in Westchester? So we had our last investor meeting at Captain Lawrence Brewery, surrounded by vats of beer production. We had that in an art gallery. We're going to have an investor meeting at the Jay Heritage Center. The Jay Heritage Center is about a mile away as the crow flies here in Rye. It's John Jay's cousin, built in 1838. We're going to have an investor meeting in a building built in 1838 that's a historical site throughout the country. As soon as you walk into the building, you feel the history. And it's going to overlook the Long Island Sound Gardens. And then we're having an investor meeting in June at Garcia's Bar. Garcia's Bar is connected right next to the Capitol Theater in Portchester. And anybody that's ever played rock and roll, from the Stones to the Grateful Dead, they have shows now. Phil Lesh lives there for months at a time, the bass player. We're having a meeting at Garcia's Bar. And, I really shouldn't say this because thousands of viewers, tens of thousands are going to say it. But the only reason, Matt, that I'm having the investor meeting at Garcia's Bar is so I could play guitar with my friend's band afterwards.
All right, listen. So the key question is, what song are you going to play? What song are you best?
Well, I wrote a couple of songs and some other moments of clarity.
Yeah.
That remains to be determined. But as you can see, I'm a guitar player such as you are with your guitar in the background. I'm an old finger picker. I use finger picks like old Southern blues, and
yeah.
It keeps me off the streets, Matt.
It's a great way to decompress. It's just like it's your own headspace, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation for cocktails, Matt.
Yeah, well, I'm actually I'm in Florida now, and I'm flying up tomorrow. I'll be in New York City tomorrow.
Listen, anytime, give me a head start. I'd love to shake your hand, and lunch or dinner would be on me. It'd be my pleasure, Matt.
Well, I appreciate it. I have one question I've been waiting to ask you, and we're going to finish with this. You mentioned your wife many times. You mentioned your family many times, and I want you to. What I'm really curious about is throughout all of this. Now we got the story. Like I can hear the common threads that are weaved through everything you've done. And first of all, it's never about you. It's always about what you can give. It's always about other people. It's about achievement. When it is about you, it's about achievement, but just to see if you can do it. Right. Yeah. It's a very passionate, authentic way you approach everything.
Thank you, man.
The entire time it sounds like you've had a family that has supported you, even when your kids were little. They're bigger, they're grown now, I assume. That sounds like the number one most important thing. It was the common thread throughout all of it.
I'll tell you, I made the best decision I ever made in my life was asking my wife to marry me. She has been, and the one adjective I describe about my beautiful wife, Lisa, is she's tolerant.
I was going to say, does she still feel it's the best decision she made? I'm just kidding.
Well, that depends on the day, maybe.
Right.
But so people asked me, I was at an investor meeting at the Microsoft building in the city, and it was an Asian fund that had me on the panel. And it must have been 40, 50 people in the room, mostly Asian that spoke broken English. And they asked me what was my most successful and profitable investment to date.
I know where you're going.
I said, my wife's shoe collection.
Right.
And there was a silence, like dead silence. And they go, then people started to go, I get it. And it was funny. But Lisa is, she's just a remarkable human being. She's a workaholic. She gives. And she's the background for anything I've done in my last 31 years. She's my background. If it's not for her, chances are many of these things don't happen. Certainly going through my 2 years of darkness after our business failed, without her and my other two professionals, I'm not here.
That's powerful, man. You just I glazed over this. You didn't tell us how you came out of that.
It wasn't easy. It was a lot of shrink time, and my wife's love. That's it, and support. And my financial plans were not aligned, but I have enough to pay my expenses and maybe just a little bit left over. But and I get a little verklempt, but my folks are helping me, even though they're not here. I could still hear my dad yelling at me. I'm just grateful that I have such a good support crew. I mean, I got the best kids in the world, and I won't even go into that. But you know, the moment our daughter came into this planet and was put in Lisa's arms, my wife had a really big job at Calvin Klein. She was in the collections division. Barry Schwartz, Calvin's partner, was at our wedding. It was a mom and pop business, and she wanted to continue her career after we gave birth to our daughter. I say we, right? I gave birth, right? The moment our daughter was put in my wife's hands, her career was over. That second, her career was over, and she started a new career as a full-time mom. And a really funny story, just before I know we got to go, but I started the Westchester Angels for another reason, because my wife wanted me out of the house, right? So now that I'm working from home, she took a job in town, so she's out of the house.
That's great. That's great.
You know what, Matt? It really is about having a support team to support you, to keep you propped up and to help you get off the ground when you're down.
I'm gonna read off to you some of the words that people should take from this conversation, some of the thoughts, the mindset. First of all, we're going to start with what you just said, which is having the right people around you. And the people that you have, that you surround yourself with, that small group of people, many people have said it many different ways, but you are those people. If you have 5-6 key people around you, that is who you are. So be careful who you surround yourself with, is something I'm taking away. You early on, it was sort of like, I'm thinking like, go big or go home, early on when you mentioned the way you challenge yourself. And it is important to stay motivated, to be disciplined. It builds self-confidence. This is all the things I just heard you talk about. I heard perseverance. I heard hard work. I mean, how many times you said you're a workaholic? We started out by saying we see you who you are now, but you just told us, you brought us back to the beginning, and you did a great job of telling that story. Nothing is an overnight success. It takes decades and decades of hard work. There is no shortcut. This is everything that I'm hearing from you. And by the way, I hear similar stories from people who are successful, and I don't just mean financially, well-rounded, successful people. These are the common things we hear. And I'm really glad you came on the show and you told just your version of a success story, knowing that there can be very hard times, and it is the things that make you successful that still get you through the hard times.
Yeah, well, man, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
I feel the same exact way. We end every show with 2 things. One, I am going to say to everybody who watches this, be humble, do the work, hustle. As you heard today, you can reach your potential, but you don't even know what your potential is unless you keep pushing yourself. Agreed. The last thing is there anything that you want to share if you're interested in having anybody find out about you, or, is there something you want to share?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I don't tweet. I don't do Snapagram or InstaChat or any stuff like that. I'm old school. I'd rather shake your hand and look you in the eye. That's why at the Westchester Angels, we try and limit the geographic position to the New York area and tri-state area, because we want to meet you in person. We want to go to your location, even if it's at the kitchen table. Business is 100% about people. And the key thing for business owners is you have to surround yourself with the right people and get rid of the wrong people very quickly. It only takes one nasty person to stink up the whole room. So that's my advice. Stephen Jobs didn't start Apple by himself. He surrounded himself with qualified people. Business is 100% about people. And I don't care if you own the local deli or you're Sam Bobley of Oculus scaling his business. It's about people. And it's a very simple formula, but it's really difficult in action. Don't hire people you can't fire. Don't hire your brother-in-law. Don't hire people you can't fire. And I learned early on, my beautiful wife, Lisa, and I were going to go into a business together. After a year, we said, let's just stay married.
Right. That's the most valuable lesson right there.
Let's just stay married. But that's my parting words, Matt, is business is about people. Surround yourself with the right people.
Fantastic. We are going to put your information down below when this gets published. So the description is going to have your LinkedIn and anything else you want us to put out there. And again, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate it. This is awesome talking with you.
Yeah, Matt, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed myself going over some old times. And I just, listen, as you said before, if we connect to one or two people and we've motivated them to do something better, that's what this is all about.
That's what it's about.
Matt, thank you so much, man.